If you had asked me 6 months ago what love felt like, I probably would have said something cheesy, like falling asleep next to your best friend, or knowing someone's heartbeat better than your own. That's who I used to be. The hopelessly loyal husband. The steady, quiet type. The one who never missed an anniversary, who still brought flowers on random Wednesdays, who thought trust was something you didn't need to question once it was earned. Her name is Natalie. We met in college. She was the wild one, the kind of girl who danced barefoot in the rain just to feel the earth. I was drawn to her from the moment she laughed at one of my awkward jokes like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That laugh built our foundation. That, and a million small things, the way she sang in the shower, her habit of drawing hearts in the steam on the bathroom mirror, her uncanny ability to fall asleep during every movie we started. Those were the things I clung to when everything else started to unravel. The signs weren't loud. They never are they? That's what makes them dangerous. The slow fade is harder to detect than the sudden drop. I noticed how her good morning kisses became shorter, how she started leaving earlier for her weekly yoga class, the one I found out later she stopped attending months ago. She used to tell me every little detail about her day, even the boring ones, and I loved that. But gradually, the silence between us grew like fog, settling in places we used to be warm. I thought it was me, that I wasn't doing enough, that maybe I'd gotten lazy, stopped surprising her, stopped asking about her dreams, stopped being exciting. I started doing more. I cleaned more, cooked more, bought her the new art supplies she had once mentioned in passing. I even booked us a weekend away in the mountains, thinking maybe we just needed to reconnect, like we used to. She canceled the trip the night before we were supposed to leave. Said a work emergency came up. I believed her, because I wanted to. Until one morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Her phone buzzed twice before the sun even came up. She was still in the shower. The name on the screen was saved as Lee, work, but the message wasn't exactly professional. It read, "Still thinking about last night. Can't stop." I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't even cry. I just stared at those words until my hands went numb. Then I placed her phone back exactly how I found it. When she walked out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her body, smiling like everything was fine, I kissed her on the forehead and told her I'd make coffee. That was the moment something inside me cracked, quietly, like a fault line beneath a city. For the next few days, I played the role. I didn't confront her. I needed to be sure. Needed time to collect myself. I started noticing things I hadn't seen before. How she tilted her phone away when texting, how she suddenly had meetings at odd hours, how distant her eyes were when she looked at me. Like she was looking through me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote everything down. Not for revenge. Not for proof. Just to process. Every night, I opened a note on my phone and wrote what I felt. My confusion, my heartbreak, my disbelief. It became my anchor, something to hold on to when I felt like drowning in silence. And then, it happened. A week later, we were sitting in the kitchen. I had made pasta, her favorite. She barely touched it. She was distracted, checking her phone, biting her lip in that nervous way she did when she was hiding something. I leaned across the table, reached for her hand, and she looked at me, finally, really looked at me. I smiled, but it was hollow. "You look tired," I said gently. "You don't have to lie anymore." She blinked. Her lips parted, and I could see the moment fear slid across her face like a curtain. I stood up slowly, walked to her side of the table. She turned in her seat to face me, and that's when I leaned in, like I was about to kiss her. I saw her flinch. A reflex. Guilt is loud when you know what to look for. So I said it, without blinking. "I'd kiss you, but I don't want to taste your boyfriend." She froze. I've never seen a person go so still, like her entire nervous system had short-circuited. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her phone was still in her hand, shaking now. I waited for her to say something, deny it, maybe. Cry. Apologize. Run. But she didn't do any of that. She did something I never expected. She asked, quietly, "How long have you known?" That's where everything changed. She asked how long I had known, but I didn't answer her right away. I didn't know her that. Not yet. I just stood there beside her, and I watched the color drain from her face like someone had turned off the lights behind her eyes. It's strange, you spend years memorizing someone's expressions, their tics, the way their eyebrows arch when they're annoyed or the way their voice softens when they're guilty. But when someone's mask falls off completely, there's nothing familiar left. She wasn't the woman I married in that moment. She was a stranger who wore my wife's face like a borrowed costume. The kitchen was too quiet. You could hear the hum of the fridge, the soft tick of the wall clock, and her breathing fast and uneven. I sat back down across from her, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to see if she'd fill the silence. Sometimes people reveal the truth not through confession, but through the way they panic when you don't give them a script to follow. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Her voice cracked on the edges like wet paper. "Dean, I didn't mean for this to happen." That was her opening line. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Just that tired, overused phrase you hear in every breakup movie ever made. So I smiled. Not out of humor, more like disbelief. "You didn't mean for what to happen?" I asked, keeping my voice low, calm, almost eerily so. She flinched at that, like she hadn't expected me to sound that steady. I think it scared her more than if I had yelled. She was prepared for a blow-up. Not this cold, quiet unraveling. She reached for my hand across the table, but I moved it away before she touched me. I watched her fingers curl in on themselves like she'd touched a flame. I could tell she wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Maybe she was afraid I'd see they were fake. Or maybe she just wasn't sure what part of her story I already knew. And that's when I realized something that shook me harder than the affair itself. She didn't know what version of the lie to stick with. "I met him at the gym," she finally said. "It wasn't serious. It was just supposed to be harmless." That word, harmless, hit me like a punch. It echoed around the kitchen like a slap. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my glass across the room. I just nodded slowly and replied, "So when you kissed me the night you came home from the gym, was that supposed to be harmless too?" She looked away, biting her lip like she wanted to disappear. And maybe she did. I didn't press her. I just stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the backyard, the same yard where we'd once talked about building a deck, maybe even starting a garden. The same yard where she took photos for social media pretending our life was perfect. I remember thinking how staged it had all become, the smiles, the matching pajamas on holidays, the way we held hands in public just to keep up appearances. Looking back now, I think I was more in love with the life we built than the person I built it with. She tried again. "Dean, it didn't mean anything. I didn't love him. I just felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. You were always working. You barely looked at me." Her voice trembled as she searched for something that would justify the mess she made. And maybe this is the part where people expect me to say I felt guilty, that I should have done more, paid more attention. But here's the truth. I did see her. I saw her every day. I just never realized she was already looking past me. "I never stopped loving you," I whispered, not even sure she could hear me. But she did. And she broke. The tears came then fast and messy. She stood up, tried to move closer, to reach me again. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't comfort her. Because I wasn't hers to reach anymore. I needed time. Space. Air. I needed to feel the world outside that kitchen, outside the weight of her lies. So I stepped past her, walked to the front door, and opened it. I didn't say where I was going. I didn't say when I'd be back. I just said one thing as I crossed the threshold. "You made me feel small in the one place I was supposed to feel safe." And I left her standing there, still crying, still silent, still not knowing just how much I already knew. What she didn't realize was that her boyfriend wasn't the only secret she was keeping. And in part 3, that other secret, it comes out. I didn't go far. I didn't need to. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, barely watching the road, barely breathing, really. It's strange. You expect the moment you walk away from something that hurt you, there'll be relief. Some kind of emotional exhale. But there wasn't. Just this quiet, cold pressure behind my ribs that made it hard to sit still. I ended up parked in front of an old library that had been closed for years. I used to ride my bike there as a kid, back when everything felt permanent. Safe. Funny how your brain pulls you back to the places that made you feel whole when you're breaking in real time. I didn't cry. Not because I was being strong, I just couldn't. I stared at the empty sidewalk for maybe 20 minutes, trying to remember the last time Natalie had looked at me like I was enough. Not out of obligation, not out of routine, but with actual want. I couldn't find it. I couldn't even imagine it. That scared me more than anything she'd said back in the kitchen. I kept thinking about how she'd said it wasn't serious, as if that made it easier to swallow, as if minimizing it was the same as undoing it. But there's no just in betrayal. There's no version of a lie that doesn't stain the truth it touches. I was married to her. I built my life around her. And while I was busy believing in us, she was building exits. I stayed out until the sun went down. Not to punish her. Not to make her worry. Just because I didn't know how to go back into the same house where her lies still lived. I pulled into the driveway slowly, half expecting the porch light to be off. It wasn't. She had left it on, like always. Like she thought habit could undo what had already been said. The living room was dark when I stepped inside, except for the dim glow of the hallway lamp. She was on the couch, wrapped in the same gray blanket she always used when she wasn't feeling well. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair was pulled up in that messy way that used to make me smile. She didn't move when I came in. She didn't say a word. So I sat across from her, and we just sat. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. Then she finally whispered, "I know you're not coming back from this." I looked at her, and for a second, I saw a version of the woman I used to love. Not the person who lied, or the person who flinched at my touch, but the version from our first apartment, when we shared cereal out of mugs because we couldn't afford bowls yet. The girl who laughed when we got caught in the rain. The girl who once reached for my hand in a room full of strangers just to say, "I choose you." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask why that version of her had died without telling me. But I didn't. I simply asked, "What would you have done if I never found out?" She didn't answer right away. Just stared at the carpet like the truth was stitched into the fabric. Finally, she said, "I don't know." And that, more than anything, was the most honest thing she had said all night. That's when I told her the part she didn't expect. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and spoke slowly. "I wasn't going to check your phone. I wasn't going to follow you. I believed you, until I didn't." And when that shift happened, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Like a door closing somewhere in the house that no one else hears but you. She wiped her cheek, then asked, "Is there someone else?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. "There's never been anyone but you," I said. That was the problem. That moment felt like a funeral. Not for our marriage, but for the version of me who still believed in it. She asked if I was going to leave. I told her the truth. Not yet. Because leaving isn't always about packing bags or walking out the door. Sometimes it's slower. Sometimes it's the act of detaching, of untangling yourself from someone thread by thread until, one morning, you wake up and realize there's a stranger lying in your bed. She didn't fight me on it. She just nodded and cried. And in that silence, I realized something. This story, my story, wasn't about revenge. It was about rediscovery. And in part 4, that rediscovery begins. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid in bed, eyes closed. But every time I got close to drifting off, some random memory would show up like an uninvited guest and yank me right back into the ache. Memories I hadn't thought about in years, like the time we moved into this house and she spilled paint all over the floor, and we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Or the way she used to reach across the bed just before falling asleep and tuck her hand under mine, as if making sure I didn't vanish during the night. I used to think that kind of closeness meant something sacred. But now, every memory came with a bitter twist, like sugar gone bad in the mouth. She stayed in the guest room. I didn't ask her to. She just knew. The silence between us was thick and unbearable, not the kind of silence that invites peace, but the kind that feels like you're both standing on opposite sides of a frozen lake, terrified to move in case everything beneath you cracks. I got up around 5 a.m. and sat on the back steps with a cup of coffee, watching the sky shift from charcoal to gray. We used to sit there together. Now it was just me and the cold. And in that silence, something strange happened. I started asking myself a question I didn't expect. What if she never did this? What if she had stayed loyal? What if she had kept smiling at me the way she used to, and I never had to feel this kind of emptiness? Would I still be the same man I was 2 weeks ago? The answer scared me. Because deep down, I knew I wouldn't. I would have kept giving more of myself. I would have kept mistaking her quiet withdrawal for exhaustion, not disinterest. I would have kept sacrificing without even realizing it. This pain, this betrayal, had pulled the curtain back. And the view was brutal. Around 8 a.m., she came downstairs. Her eyes were swollen. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't touched. We didn't speak. Not until she finally said, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wish I could take it back." I looked at her. I mean, really looked at her. And for a moment, I saw what she meant, not just the regret, but the panic. The sudden realization that consequences aren't just theoretical. That love, once broken, doesn't magically glue itself back together. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. Not to forgive, not to rage, not to offer comfort or clarity. Instead, I asked her something she didn't see coming. When did I stop being enough? She blinked, like the question itself was offensive. You were always enough. I was just. I don't know. I think I lost myself. She paused. And instead of trying to fix that with you, I looked elsewhere. That admission was somehow worse than denial. Because it told me she knew better and still chose wrong. She didn't trip. She walked toward it. She didn't break under pressure. She opened the door and let someone else in. I left the house again, not out of anger, but necessity. I went to a park we used to visit on weekends. There was this spot by the lake, tucked behind a line of evergreens, where we once carved our initials into a bench. I hadn't been there in years. The carving was still faintly visible. I ran my fingers over it and felt nothing. Like touching the name of someone I used to know. I sat there for hours, not scrolling through my phone, not listening to music, just sitting, letting everything rise and settle. I thought about all the things I had given her that she never asked for, my loyalty, my time, my future. I thought about all the times I should have asked harder questions but didn't because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I thought about how trust isn't something you give once, it's something you renew daily, like a vow. And she had let it expire. It wasn't until the sun began to dip that I realized I hadn't eaten all day. But I didn't care. Hunger felt distant, like a language I used to speak. I drove home slowly, letting the day bleed out behind me. When I walked in, she was in the same spot I had left her on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest, still wearing the same sweatshirt. She looked up when I entered, but didn't say anything. That was the difference between us. She had run out of things to say, and I had just started learning what silence could reveal. I went to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and opened the closet. I started pulling down boxes. Not to leave. Not yet. But to make space. Literal space. I needed the room to breathe again. I needed to see my side of the closet and not hers. I folded her clothes and set them in the guest room. It wasn't an act of punishment. It was an act of preservation. She came up while I was finishing. Are you moving out? I shook my head. I'm staying. But I'm not going to pretend nothing happened. She nodded, lips pressed tightly. What does that mean? It means, I said, I need to live beside you for a while, without belonging to you. She didn't reply. But she didn't protest either. And maybe that was the first honest moment we'd had in years. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that while she was slipping away from me, I had already started rebuilding something in secret. Not a new relationship. Not revenge. But a quiet, private blueprint for who I was going to become next. Because I couldn't go back. And in part 5, she'll find out just how far I've already gone. I've always believed that grief doesn't start the moment something ends. It begins when something changes quietly and you pretend it hasn't. That was my life for longer than I realized. Natalie hadn't just cheated on me with another man. She had left me emotionally a long time before that. What hurt wasn't the night she physically crossed the line. It was every night before, when she sat across from me at dinner and I mistook her silence for tiredness. When she kissed me goodnight out of habit, not affection. When she stopped asking about my day, not because she was distracted, but because she didn't care to know anymore. After that night when I moved her clothes into the guest room, our house fell into this eerie rhythm, not quite cold, but not warm either. We existed like two shadows under the same roof. No fights, no affection, just daily choreography, coffee made, lights turned off, keys grabbed, doors closed. She tried once or twice to engage me, asked if I wanted to talk, suggested a walk, even brought home my favorite pastries from the cafe near my office. But I didn't bite. I wasn't being cruel. I just wasn't interested in performing forgiveness before I even knew if healing was possible. What she didn't know, and what I hadn't fully admitted even to myself, was that during those quiet days, I was slowly pulling myself out of the version of me that had existed inside our marriage. It wasn't intentional at first, but it began to take shape the more space I created around her. I started waking up earlier. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd go for long walks before work. No music. No podcasts. Just the sound of gravel under my shoes and the occasional bird breaking the morning silence. There was something sacred in being alone with my thoughts in the pre-dawn cold. I wasn't trying to plan my next move. I wasn't crafting revenge or escape. I was simply listening to myself. For the first time in a long time, I began journaling every morning. A simple notebook, nothing fancy. I didn't write about her. I wrote about me. About the way my chest felt lighter when I sat by the lake. About how I rediscovered the smell of early autumn, the kind of scent that reminded me of childhood bike rides and my grandfather's flannel jackets. I wrote about my dreams, not the ones you have when you sleep, but the ones you stop admitting out loud because life becomes too loud to hear them. Then came the evening shifts. I started cooking again, not just the simple meals she and I used to throw together, but meals that required focus and patience. Dishes that reminded me I could still create something from scratch. I played jazz while I chopped vegetables, sipped tea instead of wine, and sometimes ate alone by candlelight just to prove I could enjoy solitude without bitterness. Some nights, I would drive, not to anywhere in particular, but to the places that once meant something to me. I visited the bookstore I used to go to before we got married. I stopped by an art exhibit downtown, walked slowly from canvas to canvas like I had nowhere else to be. I wasn't trying to escape my marriage. I was reintroducing myself to a version of Dean that hadn't been buried under someone else's expectations. And slowly, almost without meaning to, I became someone Natalie didn't recognize. She noticed. Of course she did. Her glances grew longer. She hovered in doorways when I was reading. She asked where I'd been after my walks, even though I always told her. One night, she came into the kitchen while I was finishing a new recipe and said, "You're different." I looked up from the stove and simply said, "I am." There was no pride in my voice. No resentment either. Just truth. Undeniable, steady truth. She took a step closer. "Are you okay?" And here's where the shift became undeniable. I said, "I think I'm finally starting to be." She didn't know what to do with that answer. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an accusation. But it was final in a way that no slammed door or shouted fight could ever be. She stood there for a few seconds, like she was waiting for me to offer her a way back in. But I didn't. Because the more I healed, the less I needed her to be part of it. That night, I slept deeply. No noise in my chest. No racing thoughts. Just sleep, real, uninterrupted sleep, like my soul had finally found a room of its own in the house I once shared. She wasn't losing me to another person. She was losing me to my own peace. She knocked on my door. That was new. She hadn't done that before. For weeks, she moved through the house like a ghost who believed she still belonged to it, avoiding eye contact, staying in the periphery, half existing in shared spaces. But that night, she knocked. Just once. A soft, almost hesitant tap that felt less like a request to enter and more like a final confession sitting on the other side of the door. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the door and waited, listening for whatever came next. Maybe she'd walk away. Maybe she'd push the door open. But she didn't. She waited. When I finally opened it, she was standing there in one of my old sweatshirts, the one she used to steal from the dryer when she missed me. She looked smaller in it now, swallowed up by memories she could no longer wear comfortably. She didn't speak right away. Just looked at me the way someone might look at a letter they were scared to open. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded once and stepped aside. She didn't come in right away. She stood in the doorway, as if unsure whether she still had the right to cross that threshold. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. When she finally entered, her steps were quiet, careful. She sat on the floor instead of next to me. Maybe that was her way of saying she no longer deserved the comfort of my space. She kept her eyes on the carpet when she spoke. "I know I've already said sorry," she began, her voice thin and almost breathless. "But I don't think you know what I meant." I didn't reply. She didn't expect me to. "I wasn't just sorry I hurt you. I was sorry I let myself become the kind of person who could." That line caught me off guard. Not because it made things better. It didn't. But because, for the first time, she wasn't trying to save herself. She was finally naming what she did, not as a mistake, but as a choice. "There's a difference." She kept going slowly. "I thought I needed something else. I thought I had grown past you. That you were still in the same place, and I had moved on in some way that made me more alive. But I wasn't more alive. I was just more distracted." I watched her hands clenched, then unclenched, like she was trying to wring the guilt from her palms. "I never stopped loving you," she added. That was the sentence that made me look away. Because that's the thing about love, it's not always enough. You can love someone and still destroy them. You can love someone and still choose yourself at their expense. Love isn't proof of loyalty. It's just a feeling. What matters is how you honor it when no one's watching. She finally looked up at me, eyes red but dry. "Are you going to leave?" I'd thought about that question more times than I could count. Not just logistically, but spiritually. Could I rebuild with someone who broke the very foundation we stood on? Could I trust someone who looked me in the eye every day while hiding someone else in the spaces between? But something had shifted, and it wasn't about staying or leaving anymore. It was about becoming. I spoke gently, like I was speaking to the past instead of the woman in front of me. "I'm not going anywhere right now. But I'm not staying in this version of us either." She looked confused. Not hurt, just confused. And maybe that was the hardest part. She hadn't realized I'd already been walking away internally for weeks. That every quiet moment of solitude I created was me pulling the roots out from underneath our story. I'm rebuilding, I continued. Not out of spite. Not to punish you. Just because I don't want to disappear inside someone else's life ever again. She nodded, but her body deflated. Like she understood that her apology wouldn't reset the clock. That forgiveness, if it ever came, would be slow and silent. Earned, not expected. I stood up, walked past her, and paused in the doorway. You're not my enemy, I said. But you're not my home either. Not right now. Then I left the room, not to run, not to sulk, but to sit outside under the night sky. I looked up, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't ask for clarity or peace. I just breathed. And that was enough. The morning it happened, I wasn't planning to talk to anyone. I hadn't spoken to friends in weeks, and the idea of explaining the emotional wreckage to someone who hadn't lived in it felt exhausting. So I stayed quiet, kept to my small world, and let the routines carry me. Wake up early, walk before sunrise, journal, cook, breathe. That was my rhythm now. A rhythm I'd carved out of what used to be us. It was early, just after 6. I stopped at a cafe I hadn't been to in years, not one of the polished chain places, but a tiny corner shop tucked into a neighborhood that hadn't changed much since college. The walls were the same muted orange. The wooden counter still leaned slightly to one side. The barista was new, of course, but the smell, cinnamon, espresso, and something faintly citrus, it hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. I sat in the corner booth. Same one Natalie and I used to sit in on lazy Saturdays. I didn't come here for nostalgia. I just wanted quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't follow you around the house like a ghost. About 10 minutes in, while I was stirring sugar into my coffee, mostly just for the motion, someone approached. A woman, mid-50s, short silver hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen a lot and forgotten very little. She wasn't familiar, but she wasn't a stranger either. She paused by my booth. I'm sorry, she said gently. I don't mean to interrupt, but, are you Dean? That startled me more than I showed. Yeah, I replied cautiously. Do we know each other? She smiled softly. My name's Clara. I used to work with Natalie. Long time ago. She probably never mentioned me. She didn't sit down. Just stood there like she wasn't sure she had permission to step into my space. I nodded politely, expecting her to say something about a work project or needing contact info. But instead, she said something that stopped me cold. I saw her a few weeks ago. Before everything, I guess. She was distant. We hadn't spoken in years, but when she hugged me goodbye, I could tell something was cracking. I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't spoken Natalie's name out loud in public since the day everything changed. It felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I no longer claimed. She told me she was afraid you didn't see her anymore, Clara continued. But what she didn't say, and what I could see plain as day, was that she was the one who stopped looking first. The words hit hard, not because they were cruel, but because they were true, and they came from someone who had no reason to lie. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she added, finally sitting down across from me. Maybe because I've lived long enough to know what regret looks like when it's setting in. And she's swimming in it. I stared down at my coffee. Regret doesn't rebuild trust. Clara nodded. No, it doesn't. But it's usually where healing starts. Not for her, for you. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked the question no one had dared to ask me yet. What do you want now? Not what happened. Not how are you holding up. But something deeper. Something that required me to stop reciting facts and start examining myself. What did I want? It was the first time I realized. I wasn't sure. Peace, yes. Space, of course. But beyond that, I didn't know what kind of life I wanted to build now. I had spent so much of myself on holding things together, holding us together, that I never gave real thought to who I was without the holding. Clara didn't press. She just listened. And before she left, she said one more thing that stayed with me ever since. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. But don't confuse silence with healing. Speak to yourself like someone who matters. Because you still do. She walked out without asking for my number. Without trying to reconnect us. Without offering advice I didn't need. Just a reminder, from someone who had seen my story from the outside, that I was allowed to matter again. I sat there long after she left. The coffee had gone cold. The street outside had grown louder, but I didn't move. I just let those words settle in the space Natalie once occupied. That night, when I returned home, Natalie looked up from the couch like she'd been waiting for something. But I didn't give her an update. I didn't tell her about Clara. I didn't say anything about where I'd been. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and said quietly, "Just so you know, I'm not angry anymore. But that doesn't mean we're okay." She nodded. And for the first time since it happened, she didn't try to fix it. She just sat with it. That, in itself, was a shift. But it wasn't a reunion. It was a slow goodbye to the version of us that was already gone. There's something about the way endings arrive that you never really expect. You imagine they'll be sharp, maybe painful, maybe loud. But more often than not, they arrive softly. In a quiet Tuesday morning. In a conversation that doesn't go off like a bomb, but lands like a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding for months. That's how it happened for me and Natalie. We had spent the last few weeks living in a space that neither of us recognized anymore. There was no more pretending, no more performance. I cooked. She cleaned. We passed each other like neighbors, polite, but distant. I no longer felt angry. She no longer tried to explain. And for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like a threat. It felt like acceptance. Then one morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw her sitting at the table, a small notebook in front of her. The one I had seen her use once years ago when she was still sketching ideas for her design clients. It had been untouched for ages. She looked up at me with a kind of calm I hadn't seen in a long time. "I've been writing," she said. I didn't sit down. I just leaned against the counter and waited. She opened the notebook, then closed it again. "I've been writing things I never told you. Not about the affair. About me. About how long I've been lost." I nodded. Not because I forgave everything, but because I understood something now. Her choices weren't about destroying me. They were about her trying to find herself in a way that cost us both too much. Then she did something I never expected. She slid a small envelope across the table. I opened it slowly, unsure of what I'd find. But inside wasn't a letter or some dramatic goodbye. It was a brochure. For a month-long artist's retreat. In a different state. Her name was already on the participant list. "I'm going," she said softly. "I think it's time we both stop orbiting a version of this life that doesn't fit anymore." I stared at the page, and something inside me released, not relief, not sadness. Just lightness. "When?" I asked. "Next week." I poured myself some coffee, sat across from her, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I said, "That's good. I hope it gives you space to become who you were always supposed to be." She smiled, and it was real. Not forced. Not performative. Just real. "I hope the same for you," she said. "You've always carried more than you had to." We spent the rest of that morning packing some of her things. No tears. No long monologues. Just quiet music playing from the speaker. Her humming along to a song we both loved once. I helped carry her suitcase to the car. She paused before getting in. "I did love you," she said. "Even when I forgot how to show it." "I believe you," I replied. "But I love myself now too." And that was the real shift. She left that afternoon. And the house didn't feel empty when she did. It felt clear. In the weeks that followed, I kept waking up early. I kept journaling. I returned to the cafe. I even applied for a writing workshop Clara had mentioned once, just to see what it would feel like to explore that side of myself. One evening, I took a long walk by the lake. The same spot where I had once stared out into the water, wondering what would become of me. But that night, I didn't wonder. I just stood there whole, calm, and still. Not broken. Not bitter. Just free. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything to begin again. Because it already had.